Hello, beer fans and homebrewers. Welcome back to RGR Craft. We are going to get into a really interesting topic that everybody who homebrews needs to get into at one point in their time or another, whether you're just starting out, maybe you're doing kits, maybe you're doing extract, maybe you're looking to get up into all grain, maybe you're looking to take your 15-gallon system and go pro. Maybe you want to do something that can appeal to the masses. We're going to talk about how we go about designing a recipe, the research, the things that go into it, all kinds of aspects. I'm going to give you my take. Mike's going to give you his. And if you haven't seen him yet, I'm Ryan Tracy, and this is Mike Munhall.
Hi. Hey, you know what's funny? This is like the first show in like 4 months, I think, that we're not wearing the same hat.
That's a plus. I like that.
I don't know how we worked that out, but yeah, awesome. What are you drinking?
I just went back to barley wine. We recently did a barley wine review of a commercial one, and I just wanted to get a little bit more of that. So I dug into the old chest freezer and got what I needed to get. Folks, if you're new, make sure you click the like and the sub and the bell notification so you know what comes next, because we are turning out a different schedule and a different style of show, just so that we can sit back, have a couple beers, and talk about how you make more of it. So that's really the focus.
Yeah. So recipe formulation, huh? I like this. This one's fun. By the way, thanks for asking. I'm having New Belgium triple. Anyway.
Yeah. Tell the folks, I already knew.
Yeah, I'm sure you did. Recipe formulation. So this is fun. Man, I've got my way of how to design a recipe from scratch. I'm sure you do. Everybody does. But I want to start with you, Ryan. I want to know what your process is. So like if you are thinking, I've got an idea for something I want to brew, take me through what you do step by step. I mean, obviously you have an idea and somehow it ends with a beer in a glass, right?
Usually it does. Not always. I wish it was always.
Sure. Right.
I had a few ideas about this Sriracha Ace monstrosity that we tried, and that didn't work out so well. So for me, it almost always starts with the inspiration of, hey, I like this beer, but I wish it had X. And so I can either, if it's a commercial beer, then I can, try to go look up a clone recipe or something like that. There are all kinds of resources around the web that list clones or how someone has achieved something similar to that flavor profile, and more power to them. You can always take those in, but everybody approaches everything from their own point of view. And so I don't find them to be a one for one, especially when you're talking about matching a subjective palate. You don't know what someone else was tasting. You and I don't even taste the same things in the same beer.
True. Yeah.
So for me, I kind of take a step back from that. Like, what's my goal? I want X base, but I want to change it to this or this or this or whatever. I'm as I grow older, I'm less inclined towards like the dank IPAs. Like I want something brighter, but I still want that bitterness. I just don't need all the pine and moss. You know what I mean?
Right. So let's say that you have, I don't know, give me an example of a beer that you like. I'm so you know what? Let's talk about the barley wine that we had together last time we were recorded, right? That was Third Coast Old Ale. That was a barley wine.
Yep.
I thought it was, had a bigger hop profile or bitterness than maybe you did. You thought it was a little bit more balanced, but let's just say you started with that. You love that beer, but you wanted to be a little bit more X. All right. So what's your next step? What are you doing?
So the first thing that I'll do is like, what style it is or whatever. If I can find a clone, I'll go do that. If I can't, then I usually will head to probably one place overall. And that's it. If you're an AHA member, you can go into the recipes there. And you can find award winners. You can find, who put up what, where. They have some clones as well. After that, I would probably go. I like some of the experimental type groups out there, Experimental Brewing, Brewlosophy. They all share recipes as well. You can check those out as well. And it's all style based. And that works perfectly. And I'll usually try to take 2 or 3 that I either recognize or make sense to me when I look at the ingredient bill, the process bill, etc., and try to like hunt and peck, merge them, try to get my base. And then I tweak from there. Like the next thing that I'm going to do with probably not a barley wine, but probably a big amber, is to really get into the Lupamax and over hop it late in the whirlpool and dry hop as well to try to like bring out not the bitterness, but the hop flavor in what is usually a very malty style.
Right, right. So that's interesting. So you do a lot of, you do a lot more research on like experimentation and the actual brewing process, and it sounds like you incorporate that more into your, like actually into your recipe and the beer that you're trying to brew. Oh, I guess, I mean, that makes sense, right? I mean, that's what you're trying to get out of it is, or whatever you're trying to get out of it, the beer characteristics, sometimes you need to incorporate into the brewing process itself. It's not just ingredients, right? It's not just the ingredients or the recipe design. Sometimes it's actually in the process of brewing itself that you're getting some of this out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not just the ingredients or the type. Like there's cryo hops now, there's regular 90 pellets, there's all kinds of things that go into it, right? I find the Lupomax stuff really intriguing for IPAs or things that need more hop presence, but without going like to the resins and like the serious like bittering substances, right? Just try to maximize by changing around like when you add something to a boil, it's pretty straightforward. And for depending on whether you, the watcher, is like an experienced home brewer or you're just starting, like that's the easiest thing to tweak is when you throw them in the kettle.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you know, and that's a good point. You know, for new brewers, it does not have to be complicated, right? There's so many variables going on in brewing. You know, if you have your malt bill, your hop schedule, your yeast selection, and your water is reasonably clean, there is so much you can do, right? I mean, given just the basic ingredients and a very similar brewing process, two new brewers have the exact same stuff is going to come up with two beers that are different.
Yeah.
You know? So yeah, you don't have to do all like crazy experimental techniques or anything beyond just, you know, a normal 1 hour boil, throw in some hops occasionally. You don't need much to come up with a good beer.
Yeah, absolutely. I would argue that 90% of the quote unquote good beers, award winning beers, are pretty straightforward.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you know, I mean, think about brewing. We've been brewing, I mean, humans have been brewing beer for how many thousands of years, right? And it's the same process. You know, it's the same fundamental process. You know, we're just now in the last maybe 15, 20 years really getting to start really tweak how we do things when we add hops, when we like our mashing techniques, our boil, we're really understanding the chemistry behind all the stuff we're doing. But I'm pretty sure for the thousands and thousands of years that we've been brewing, if we were making good beer before, you can make good beer now with a really simple recipe design or no design at all.
Yeah.
Quite honestly.
Yeah. That's the intriguing part is you can go, you know, literally 4 ingredients with 1 hop, 1 grain, yeast and water, and you're done.
Yeah.
Or you can get infinitely crazy with what you do. I'm guilty. I have a tendency to overdo malt complexity because I want different grain flavors. Right. But, you know, and that's everybody will find their equilibrium there. But that is, again, why you can go back to these different resources, people who have brewed before. There's all kinds of resources out there too, like craft brew, like there's publications that still exist. More power to them for keeping a magazine going. But like who give you alternatives, how you can tweak something, even if you are trying to keep it simple. Maybe you're going to use 2 grains. Let's at least go there.
Right. Yeah, the biggest difference between, I think, how I formulate a recipe and yours is it sounds like you start with, I'm probably generalizing, Ryan, but you start with a beer that you like, but you want it to have a little bit more or less of something. You know, I start my recipes just completely with the end in mind, right? I'm not starting with a beer that I like. I'm like starting from scratch generally. You know, starting with the end in mind, and I'm asking myself all sorts of questions. Is this a particular style? Is this just something I have in my head that I just want to try that's totally outside of the BJCP style guidelines? You know, it's not a barley wine, it's not an IPA, it's not whatever. Or am I, you know, trying to replicate a commercial beer? You know, obviously in that case, I'm kind of a little bit closer to your starting point. But that's where I start. It's like, what am I really trying to make? And then from there, I'll dive into how much alcohol do I want? What's the IBU versus malt bill? What's the ratio? What kind of balance am I looking for? A really good place. You go ahead. Yeah.
Let me ask you this, because I've been stuck in this lately. Do you get inspired by beers that you can't drink anymore, or that you haven't had in forever, or aren't distributed anymore? Like I've been craving a Scotch ale from Grant's in Yakima that I haven't had since I was in college, like 20 years ago. And so now that you say it, now like I want to go back and start from scratch. Like, how did they build that up? Where can I go?
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I was thinking about this the other day, that all the beers that I really like, right? Like my Bud Light, the case of beer that you always have in your fridge. For me, that's New Belgium Triple, and you know that. I've talked about that a lot. Yeah, there's a couple others, but they're still out there. There's not that beer that I've absolutely loved that I just can't find. And, there are beers that I've loved that I can't find, but mostly because they don't distribute here. But yeah, taking it from just those high level characteristics, I'm going to start diving into the like specific things I'm looking for, and the aroma, the appearance, the flavor, the mouthfeel. Like if you go, I will actually start with a BJCP score sheet. Mm-hmm. And I'll look at all the characteristics that are on that score sheet. And I'm like, well, because I kind of give examples of the things to look for in, the aroma and the flavor and the other characteristics. And so I'll be like, okay, mouthfeel, I want it a little bit creamy. And, aroma, I want the esters to show through in the yeast, so I will dial all that in before I even think about an ingredient. Yeah, that's where I start. It's like, what am I looking for at the very end? And it's those characteristics I'm looking for. And if that kind of starts to fall within a particular style, yeah, then so be it, but if not, that's fine too.
You're just here to crush people, win awards. I'm just here for the
medals. I think not really. If you're entering beers into competitions, 90% of the competitions, they're judging by style guidelines. So your IPA better be within all of those ranges, from ABV to color and bitterness and all that, whatever it is, I kind of want to stay away from that, right? Sometimes I just want to make a beer that I want to make.
Right. You need to. And by the way, big beers, if you're listening, can you just take screw-on plastic bottles as entries, please? Because I'm done with the beer gun.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah, what's next? So, for me, you do your research. You've got Brewlosophy and some other places where you're researching recipes and other things. I kind of do the same thing. I think I'll spend most of my time, honestly, looking to see what other people have done to achieve a particular characteristic. Mm-hmm. And that's usually through recipes. I don't necessarily research techniques as deeply as you do. But most of my research time is, I don't even have a particular place I go online. It's always just start a Google search and see what comes up, So like if I want to find how do I create a really good malt backbone? I might figure out some beers that have that. I'll go look at those recipes. Otherwise, I'll just start researching, malts that, for malt balanced beers.
I think we approach this from two different angles too that I find really interesting. Like, I think you have a tendency to keep things as simple as possible to get your job done. And I'm always chasing complexity and things like that. And I think it's interesting that you say malt backbone, because I think a lot of people, when they're drinking, especially homebrewed beer, they're thinking mouthfeel, because I don't necessarily think that they're the same thing. Because you can add wheat, you can add oats, and you can get a mouthfeel that's more substantial without it really being the malt that's doing it. Mm-hmm. That you have that kind of cloyingness,
Right. Yeah, exactly. There's probably for every particular characteristic that you're trying to achieve, there's a dozen different ways of achieving that. And it's not always as straightforward as you think or as obvious as you think. So another question for you, though. So what are your go-to tools? Where are you putting your recipes? How are you? I mean, I certainly don't think that you've got pen and paper and you know all the calculations in your head. There's got to be some sort of tool that you use to create your recipes and store them.
Just a shout out to Brad. I use Beersmith. It's all I use.
Yeah.
I've toyed with some other options. Clearly on the Pico Brew, which a lot of you are familiar that I run the Pico Brew as well as my big system. Like, you can design in there. I have a tendency to design in Beersmith and translate because I'm most familiar with that. Now, at my altitude, the hop utilization doesn't always come out. I have to do a conversion even from Beersmith to really have an idea of where my taste level is going to come out at.
Mm-hmm.
But I still do those conversions, and I start in Beersmith. I like being able to store it. I like not having to be connected to the interwebs. Just have access to it. You know what I mean? Do you do something different now that you're a Grainfather-based system?
Yeah, I was. I can't remember the first tool I used. It was. Man, I must have used it for 6 or 7 years. Can't remember the name, but I switched to Beersmith. Actually, you know what? I think I switched to Beersmith when I finally found the Mac OS version. I don't, which is funny because it still looks like Windows on Mac OS. But I switched to Beersmith. It's great. Beersmith is a great tool, but since I got the Grainfather, I've been using Grainfather's tools, and honestly, they are just fine for my purposes. In fact, I have not found anything that I can't do in that Grainfather tool. It's online. It's not like a standalone app, so you do actually have to be connected. But I cannot find anything that I can't do in that app that I was able to do in Beersmith. I am sure that Beersmith is probably a little bit more robust of an application, and will do more things, but I'm not a professional brewer that needs all those tools. And Grainfather, their tools work just fine for me. And, you know, they integrates right with my brewing equipment. So,
well, and that's the thing. Same thing with the Pico. You have to get it in there in order to use it.
You know, well, with the Grainfather, you don't. I can totally run my Grainfather manually. But if I'm going to, you know, use the automation features of that Grainfather, then yes, I have to use their software, their online software, or their mobile apps. But what's interesting about the Grainfather tools is you don't have to use a Grainfather equipment. It's perfectly appropriate to just design your recipes and brew on any equipment. You can enter equipment profiles. You know, Grainfather just happens to have an equipment profile, surprise, for their own software. Yeah.
That's intriguing to me because that is one of the things, like getting the Pico right, especially because I'm brewing on the Z, which is not as widespread as say the C or the S from Pico Brew, right? And more power to Pico Brew. Keep chugging along. I'm very happy with you right now. Keep it alive. But recipe design is a little bit different, and being able to port those profiles is sometimes tricky. I've had to adjust mine in Beersmith, but it does allow that to happen. And I think at the end of the day, whether you start online or you have Brewfather or whatever, or you bring it into Grainfather or Pico Brew or Beersmith, whatever it is, as long as you can consistently approach the same brew day, I feel like that makes the chance of brewing a good beer better.
Yeah. I mean, just like having, we all know our equipment really well. We all know our brewing process really well, right? We know the software really well as you know, so it's, you get used to using that software, and it is really integrated into your brew day, into your entire brewing process. And you know that software just as well as you do your brewing equipment. And so, yeah, you know, switching software is hard. You know, like you were just talking about, right? If you wanted to port a recipe from one to the other, actually, I mean, that's probably pretty straightforward. But, you know, there could be difference in the calculations that one piece of software does and another. And they're probably not necessarily more right or wrong. You know, it's not an exact science. You know, there's so many variables that you can't predict. You know, like using one formula over another in one piece of software versus another. What happens is you start getting used to, you understand Like, well, if my Grainfather software calculates IBUs at this, but I perceive them in the actual beer at something else, well, my next batch, I'm going to lower it a little bit, but Brewsmith might use a different calculation that might be closer to perception, or even maybe make it even more extreme. I don't know.
Yeah.
But you really start learning the software really well, and that just becomes part of your process.
It does. And I think equating it to your palate is probably the best thing. As the brewer, I know you brew for other people, but as the brewer, you need to brew for yourself. You need to equate that style to what you're expecting and calibrate, right? And that said, we're going to do a whole series, I think, folks, on setting up, designing, brewing, fermenting, and probably even bottling, or at least kegging in my case.
Oh man, soup to nuts,
right?
Soup to nuts, everything, right? I'm really excited about this, right? So I think we're going to start this probably the next week or so. But yeah, we're going to design a recipe, maybe 2 recipes, and then you and I will go off and we're going to brew those recipes, and then we're going to condition those beers, and then package them, whatever that means, and then actually drink them out of a glass and evaluate them. But yes, this is going to be an entire series. It's not just not just Ryan and Mike talking, but we've got big plans for this. This is going to be really fun. I'm excited about it.
So if you are a new brewer, stay tuned. If you are an all grain brewer and you're just looking for, hey, what's different that I don't do, tune in for this. We'll have a name for it eventually, but we're going to start literally from concept all the way through the glass, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And then maybe we'll just have to have a spontaneous co-brew day where we just see what I have and throw it into a pot, and we'll see what happens. That's a completely different concept, but I think it's going to be fun. And so we don't know how many parts this is going to be. We're just going to take it as it goes, especially as our brew times, our brew chances through our own personal lives change a little bit. But I think it's a great idea, and I'm glad that you brought this up. My biggest thing, my last question for you is, do you have a style in mind now, or do you care what it is at all? Is it just throw something at a dartboard?
I don't know. I got to think about it. Honestly, where my mind right now is because we've been talking about it a lot lately. Barley wine.
I have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I won't even age mine.
We don't even necessarily have to brew the same recipe or the same style. We can kind of approach this as Mike and Ryan doing their own thing. I don't know. Let's see how it goes.
Maybe we'll open a blendery after this, folks. You can find us in Colorado, somewhere probably in Morrison.
Yeah, somewhere between us.
Right. This will be fun. But if you'd like to know more and you want to follow what happens here, make sure you click the like and the sub and the bell notification. Then you'll know what comes next. And what comes next is always a little bit interesting around here. Beer reviews, obviously equipment reviews, and now process reviews. I'll probably start talking about whiskey here pretty soon too, because the difference between drinking a beer and then distilling a beer is not that far apart. So we'll keep that in mind as well.
And our wives have been talking about doing some wine show, wow, that would be a hoot.
Yeah,
getting them two together.
We need your feedback, folks. Leave in the comments. Do you want to hear from the wives too? Because they're more than happy to do it. It's just, it's not going to be beer oriented. So maybe we'll just make this a general alchemy kind of podcast.
Yeah. So I know we're wrapping up, but I think there's one really important point to make about recipe formulation. And that is that it's rarely a once and done kind of thing, right? It's very iterative. So designing a recipe usually requires several batches, right? You're going to design a recipe, you're going to brew it, you're going to taste it and evaluate it, and then you're going to make tweaks. I've had beers that are recipes that I've been tweaking for, 5, 6, 7 or longer years now. That's, I think, a very key thing to remember, that even bad recipes can turn into good recipes. It's all about your process, and that process does not end with the beer that you have in the glass. It continues after that. Pretty important point.
I have never made a perfect beer. When I do, I'll stop tweaking.
Of course. Right. Yep.
That's it for us today, folks. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Again, like, sub, bell. You can hit us on Instagram as well. We appreciate it. Thanks for all your time, Mike. Thanks for leading this one, because I'm glad you did it.
Yeah. Cheers. Be good.
And we'll be very happy to see you guys. Take care, and we'll see you next time.